Dear fathers, I am humbled and grateful to be invited to share with you some thoughts in this Advent season. I know most of you have been preparing Christmas sermons for many years. There is probably nothing new to hear about Christmas. So I don't want to give you more reflections and sermons. Instead, I shall share with you a few stories which bring out the meaning of Christmas for me. Most of you must have come across some or all of these stories sometime or the other. That is okay. Stories have a way of communicating to our hearts, and they touch us differently at different times. So, I invite you to listen to these stories with an open heart and allow them to touch you. Let me begin with a small story I came across on the web recently. I don't know who the author is. It is titled The Christmas Miracle. A certain company had a tradition of holding a party and a lottery every Christmas Eve. The rules of the lottery draw were as follows. Each employee pays $10 as a fund. There were 300 people in the company. In other words, a total of $3,000 can be raised. The winner takes all the money home. On the day of the lottery draw, the office was filled with a lively atmosphere. Everyone wrote their names on the slips of paper and put them in the lottery box. However, a young man hesitated when he wrote because he thought that the company's cleaning lady's frail and sickly son was going to have an operation soon after the dawn of the new year. But she did not have the required money to pay for the operation, which made her quite troubled. So, even though he knew that the chance of winning was slim, with only a 1 in 300th of chance, the man wrote the name of the cleaner lady on the slip of paper. The tense moment came. The boss doubled in the lottery box and finally drew out a slip. The man also kept praying in his heart, hoping against hope that the cleaning lady may win the prize. And when the boss carefully announced the winner's name, a miracle happened. The winner turned out to be the cleaning lady. Tears broke out in the office, and the cleaning lady hurriedly rushed to the stage to accept the money. She almost burst into tears and said, "I am so fortunate and blessed. With this money, my son has new hope." As the party started, while thinking about this Christmas miracle, the man paced to the lottery box. He took out a piece of paper and opened it casually. The name on it was also the name of the cleaning lady. The man was very surprised. He took out another one and then several pieces of paper, one after another. Although the handwriting on them was different, the names were all the same. All of them had the name of the cleaning lady. The man's eyes were filled with tears, and he clearly understood that there was a Christmas miracle in the world, but the miracle will not fall from the sky. The people were required to create it by themselves. Let's pause for a moment to allow ourselves to be touched by this story. Christmas is a magical time. But what is this magic? Where is the miracle? Do we believe in the Christmas miracle? If yes, how do we let it happen? How am I going to make this Christmas miracle this year? With these thoughts, let's go on to our second story. It is by Elizabeth English, and the story is titled Waiting for Christmas. Herman and I finally locked our store and dragged ourselves home. It was 11 p.m., Christmas Eve. We had sold almost all of our toys, and all of the Christmas gift packets had been picked up, all except one package, but the person who had booked that package never appeared. Early Christmas morning, our 12-year-old son Tom, Herman, and I were out under the tree opening up gifts. But there was something humdrum about this Christmas. Tom was grown up, and I missed his childish exuberance of past years. As soon as breakfast was over, he left to visit friends, and Herman disappeared into the bedroom, mumbling, "I am going back to sleep." So there I was alone. It was nearly 9 a.m. Sleet mixed with the snow cut the air outside. Sure glad I don't have to go out on a day like today, I thought to myself. And then it began, something I had never experienced before. A strange, persistent urge. Go to the store, it seemed to say. That's crazy, I said to myself. No one opens shop on Christmas Day. For an hour, I fought that strange feeling. Finally, I could stand it no longer. I got dressed. I put on my wool coat, placed my hat on my head, then my boots, scarf, and gloves. Once outside, the wind cut right through me, and the cold wind stung my cheeks. I felt ridiculous. I had no business being out in this bitter chill. There was the store just ahead. But what in the world, I wondered. In front of the store stood two little boys, huddled together, poorly dressed and half frozen. One was about 9, the other about 6. "Here she comes," yelled the older one. "See, I told you she would come," he said. The younger one's face was wet with tears. But when he saw me, his eyes opened wide and his sobbing stopped. "What are you two children doing out here?" I scolded, hurrying them into the store. "We have been waiting for you," replied the older. "My little brother Jimmy didn't get any Christmas gifts. We want to buy some skates. That's what he wants." I looked at the $3 in his hand and at their expectant faces. Then I looked around the store. "I'm sorry," I said, "but we have no..." Then my eye caught sight of the gift shelf with its lawn package. Could it be? I walked over and unwrapped the package. Miracles of miracles. There was a pair of skates. Jimmy reached for them. "Lord," I said silently, "let them be his size." And miracle added upon miracle. They were his size. When the older boy finished tying the laces and saw that the skates fit perfectly, he stood up and presented the money to me. "No, I'm not going to take your money, I told him. I want you to have these skates and use your money to get some gloves for your hands. What I saw in Jimmy's eyes was like a blessing. It was pure joy and it was beautiful. My low spirits rose. As I locked the door, I turned to the older brother and said, "How lucky that I happened to come along when I did. How did you boys know I would come?" I wasn't prepared for his reply. His gaze was steady, and he answered me softly, "I knew you would come. I asked Jesus to send you." The tingles in my spine weren't from the cold. I knew God had planned this. As we waved goodbye, I returned home to a brighter Christmas than I had left. Let's pause for a moment to savor this story. The day after Christmas is usually a dull day. The celebrations are over, your body is tired from all the excitement, and you wonder, what is the meaning of it all? What could raise your spirits this Christmas? How could you bring some cheer and joy in another's world? Our next story is titled The Cobbler and His Guest, written by the Russian author Leo Tolstoy. And this English translation was done by Nathan Haskell-Dole. There once lived in the city of Marcellus an old shoemaker, loved and honored by his neighbors, who affectionately called him Father Martin. One Christmas Eve, as he sat alone in his little shop, reading of the visit of the wise men to the infant Jesus and of the gifts they brought, he said to himself, "If tomorrow were the first Christmas, and if this Jesus were to be born in Marcellus this night, I know what I would give him." He rose from his stool and took from a shelf overhead 2 tiny shoes of softest snow white leather with bright silver buckles. "I would give him these, my finest work." Then he paused and reflected, "But I am a foolish old man. The master has no need of my poor gifts." Replacing the shoes, he blew out the candle and retired to rest. Hardly had he closed his eyes, it seemed, when he heard a voice call his name, "Martin, Martin." Intuitively, he felt a presence. Then the voice spoke again, "Martin, you have wished to see me. Tomorrow I shall pass by your window. If you see me and bid me enter, I shall be your guest at your table." Father Martin did not sleep that night for joy, and before it was yet dawn, he rose and swept and tidied up his little shop. He spread fresh sand upon the floor and wreathed green boughs of fir along the rafters. On the spotless linen-covered table, he placed a loaf of white bread, a jar of honey, and a pitcher of milk. When all was in readiness, he took up his patient vigil at the window. Presently, he saw an old street sweeper pass by, blowing upon his thin, gnarled hands to warm them. "Poor fellow, he must be half frozen," thought Martin. Opening the door, he called out to him, "Come in, my friend, and warm yourself and drink something hot." And the man gratefully accepted the invitation. An hour passed, and Martin saw a young, miserable clothed woman carrying a baby. She paused wearily to rest in the shelter of his doorway. The heart of the old cobbler was touched. Quickly he flung open the door. "Come in and warm while you rest," he said to her. "You do not look well," he remarked. "I am going to the hospital. I hope they will take me in and my baby boy," she explained. "My husband is at sea and I am ill, without a soul to help me." "Poor child," cried Father Martin. "You must eat something while you are getting warm, no? Then let me give a cup of milk to the little one. Ah, what a bright, pretty little fellow he is. Why, you have put no shoes on him." "I have no shoes for him," sighed the mother. "Then he shall have this lovely pear I finished yesterday." And Father Martin took down from the shelf the soft, little, snow-white shoes he had admired the evening before. He slipped them on the child's feet. They fit perfectly. And shortly, the poor young mother went on her way, 2 shoes in her hand and tearful with gratitude. And Father Martin resumed his post at the window. Hour after hour went by, and although many people passed his window, and although many people shared the hospitality of the old cobbler, the expected guest did not appear. "It was only a dream," he sighed with a heavy heart. "I did hope and believe, but he has not come." Suddenly, so it seemed to his weary eyes, the room was flooded with a strange light, and to the cobbler's astonished vision, there appeared before him, one by one, the poor street sweeper, the sick mother and her child, and all the people whom he had aided during the day. Each smiled at him and said, "Have you not seen me? Did I not sit at your table?" Then they vanished from his view. At last, out of the silence, Father Martin heard again the gentle voice repeating the old familiar words, "Whosoever shall receive one such in my name receives me. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, you have done it unto me." Let's pause for a moment and ask ourselves, in what way is Christ coming to us today? How do we offer him hospitality? Do we find him in the poor and the oppressed, in the rejected and forsaken? Do they feel at home in our houses and churches? Are we kind to them? How do we welcome the infant Jesus today? Our last story this morning is about an incident during the First World War, as told by the famous American journalist Walter Cronkite. It is titled "Silent Night, Holy Night." The 1900s, the final century of the last millennium, brought unprecedented possibilities and promise. The children of these 100 years would see more improvement in the human condition than ever before in the world's history. Advances in medicine, science, and industry would all but eradicate disease, extend human life, open a dialogue among the peoples of the earth, and lift them into the vast reaches of space. But these hardly seemed like possibilities as the Christmas of 1914 drew near. The nations of Europe were at war. Anxious to expand and defend their borders, they summoned their best and brightest to the battlefront. Young men answered by the millions. A 19-year-old German boy left his job in London to enlist in the German army. English boys working and studying in Hamburg and Paris returned to London, put on their uniforms, and went back to fire upon their former friends. Secretary of War Lord Krishna expanded the British Army overnight by allowing schoolmates to enlist together. The tragedy of these battalions was no more evident than at Somme, France. Hundreds of villages on both sides lost almost all their young men in a single battle. The little paybook that every British soldier carried included a last will and testament. Thousands of these booklets were collected from the bodies of young boys, many reading simply, "I leave everything to my mother." With hardly a backward glance, the promise of youth was poured into the blind and futile aggression known as the Great War, World War I. The new century brought a new kind of warfare. Field commanders quickly realized that digging in was the only way to survive the sweep of machine gun fire. The German army had marched across Belgium before being stopped at Flanders Field. Some 60 yards away, British, French, and Belgian troops languished in trenches infested with rats and lice, pelted with freezing rain and shrapnel. As temperatures dropped, disease took hold. Snipers picked off any who raised their heads above the earthen wall. The war was but 4 months old, each side losing thousands a day, both to bullets and that silent common enemy, influenza. Between the opposing trenches was an area about the width of a football field. No man's land. Littered with barbed wire and frozen corpses, it was a sobering reminder of what the future might bring. Soldiers who survived later recalled their dead brothers being gathered up and stacked like cords of wood. By war's end, over 10 million would be lost. Not surprisingly, given the circumstances, most of the soldiers were religious and many were Christian. On Sundays, communion was passed in trenches on both sides, often to the sound of church bells ringing in nearby villages. The occasional hymn was sung, and youthful voices were heard across enemy lines. By December, the war slowed, and hopes for a quick resolution faded away. As the soldiers contemplated their desperate situation, nights grew long, and hearts yearned for peace. December 23rd. A group of German soldiers quietly moved to the ruins of a bombed out monastery. There they held their Christmas service. Later on that night, a few Christmas trees began to appear along the German fortifications, their tiny candles flickering in the night. Across the way, British soldiers took an interest in those lights as they sang together the carols of their youth. Word spread, and heads peeked cautiously over sandbags at the now thousands of Christmas trees glowing like Christmas stars. Two British officers ventured over to the German line and, against orders, arranged a Christmas truce. But the negotiation was a mere formality by then. Up and down the trenches, men from both sides already had begun crossing the line to join the celebration. Lieutenant Sir Edward Hulse assaulted the enemy with music. In a letter to his mother, he wrote, "We are going to give the enemy every conceivable song, from carols to Tipperary." The Germans responded with a Christmas concert of their own. It was not long before the cold air rang with everything from Good King Wenceslas to Auld Lang Syne. For the next 2 days, those tidings continued to spring from the hearts of common men who shared the common bond of Christmas. Further down the line, a German violinist stood atop his parapet, framed against skeletons of bare trees and shattered fortifications. Delicately perched on his desolate landscape, his cold fingers conveyed the poignant beauty of Handel's Largo. Whatever the spirit of Christmas had been before that hour, it was now, above all, the spirit of hope, of peace. A British war correspondent reported that later the soldiers heard a clear voice singing the beloved French carol, O Holy Night. The singer, Victor Granier of the Paris Opera. The night watch must have lifted their eyes toward the heavens as they heard his plaintive call. Christmas Day dawned over the muddy fields, and both sides cautiously picked their way through the barbed wire. Side by side, they buried their dead. A German officer, known only as Thomas, gave Lieutenant Hulse a Christmas gift, a Victoria Cross, and a letter which had belonged to an English captain. Lieutenant Hulse responded by giving the German officer his silk scarf. One German retrieved a photograph of himself in uniform and asked his former enemies to post it to his sister in Liverpool. Men who had shot at each other only days before gathered in a sacred service for their fallen brothers. Prayers were offered, and the 23rd Psalm was read. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. 19-year-old Arthur Pelham Byrne, who hoped to study for the ministry after the war ended, remembered. The Germans formed up on one side, the English on the other. The officers standing in front, every head bared. Yes, I think it is a sight one will never see again. As the Christmas of 1914 drew to a close, soldiers who had sung together, played together, and prayed together returned to their trenches. They must have felt reluctant to let the common ground between them become no man's land again. But the darkness fell around them. A lone voice floated across the few yards of earth on which they had stood together. In the true spirit of Christmas, one voice, then another joined in. Soon, the whole world seemed to be singing. And for a brief moment, the sound of peace was a carol every soul knew by heart. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Round you, Virgin Mother and Child, Holy Infant, so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. And that's the way it was. One silent night more than 100 years ago. And that's the way it can be, as each of us embrace the message of that silent, holy night. Let's pause for a moment and be affected by this story. We know we are celebrating the birth of the Savior. But what is its significance today? How is Jesus coming to us today? What is He asking us to let go and to hold on to? Friends, that's all I want to share with you today. Some might say, but these are mere stories. True, but stories have the potential to evoke responses in us that can make us understand and appreciate the true spirit of Christmas. May God bless us, everyone.